Infected Town, Part 1. I'm a self-proclaimed explorer. I love the rush of entering places people rarely go, seeing things people rarely see. Given that I live in a large city, most of what I do is urban exploration, which generally consists of breaking into abandoned buildings and snapping picture after picture. You've probably seen some of my material on r/abandoned porn or r/urban exploration, but I'm not linking them. I'm using this throwaway account to tell my story, so no one I know can call me crazy. For me, and I'm sure you guys can appreciate this sentiment, it's always been the creepier, the better. Some of my favorite buildings to explore have been abandoned mental institutions or sanitariums, where the ghost stories write themselves. I've never seen a ghost, however. Before last week I didn't believe in anything paranormal at all, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The reason I've decided to break my silence after a year of lurking on this sub, I'm a big NoSleeper, is because last week I decided to go on a road trip. I needed a breath of fresh air, a break from personal bullshit. So I decided to visit my best friend down in San Francisco for a change of scenery. The drive from my coastal city, but you can guess which one, takes 12 hours on the southbound freeway. But I adore driving, especially alone, so I plan to use mainly back roads, the scenic route, if you will, winding through small towns and wilderness. If I saw anything interesting, be it an old cabin in the woods or a charming small town diner, I'd stop and check it out. This extended my trip by a significant amount. I wound up driving 6 or 7 hours that first day. Near sunset, I started looking for a motel, but all I saw were trees and empty road. I refused to check my phone for a place to stay, liking the spontaneity and false sense of 21st century danger. I was content in knowing I was going south and would reach civilization eventually. The sun was disappearing behind the trees and a light rain began to fall, typical for this time of year. I took my eyes off the road for a second, fumbled with the cigarette lighter, and realized it was getting a little too dark to see. I flicked on the headlights, glanced out the windshield, and immediately slammed on the brakes. My car skidded a few feet in the rain, but luckily stopped before it hit the Jersey barriers that had been set up across the road. They sprang up out of nowhere. No warning signs, no road closed ahead. Just 4 low concrete walls all the way across the 2 lanes. They would have seriously fucked up my car if I hadn't seen them in time. I'd been going 45. I caught my breath, wondering how many people had almost crashed as I did. Probably not many. I hadn't seen a single other car for the past 2 hours. A sad, dented detour sign pointed towards a road branching off to the right, through the trees, doubtlessly leading back towards the freeway. But my eyes were drawn to the road beyond the barriers. There was no sign of construction of any kind. The road was empty, and the pavement looked exactly as old as the one I'd just been traveling. My decision was not a difficult one. Carefully, ignoring the detour, I maneuvered my car along the narrow strip of gravel to the right of the barriers, and quite easily drove past them. I drove for about 30 minutes, with no sign of construction or life of any kind. It was growing steadily darker, and I was getting unsettled, but that only increased my curiosity. What was at the end of this closed road? When I crested a hill, I was greeted with the sight of a few buildings and a large wooden sign. Welcome TO_______, it said. I'm not omitting the name or doing anything cheeky. As to what the town's called, I'm as curious as you are. I couldn't read the name or any of the other words. Most of the sign from the center down was covered in what looked like splotchy black paint, or maybe some kind of plant life. It was difficult to tell in the falling darkness, but you could see that the boards at the bottom were chipped and scratched like an animal had gotten to it. Not anything from a monster movie, just the common weathering of old wood left in the forest. But there were man-made scratches in it, too, gouged deeply into the wood over the black paint. I leaned out the window and pointed my flashlight at it. Come on, weird. but I've seen much worse graffiti in ghost towns, which I assumed this was. That got my heart pumping with excitement. I drove into town, past quite a few promising locations, all dark and empty. A police station, its windows shattered and subsequently boarded, the glass still glittering on the sidewalk. Houses with doors broken off the hinges and crooked shutters. A grocery store where one street lamp still burned eerily green by the entrance. An apartment building, the glass of its double doors, and all the windows apparently painted that with the same splotchy black as the town sign. Though my fingers were twitching, I didn't get out of the car. It was getting dark, and I was getting tired. I was alone and had no information on this ghost town. I wasn't about to break into places if they were occupied, especially at night with nothing but a flashlight. Because that's the thing. The town didn't have the air of 50 years of abandonment. Besides the boards across doors and windows and the lack of electric light, this place looked like it could have been inhabited yesterday. There was no building, decomposition, or crumbling masonry, at least from what I could see. No graffiti anywhere that would have marked the presence of other people, besides the black paint. The architecture was modern and generally holding up pretty well. Was this really a ghost town? It must be. I didn't see a single other person. All cars were parked and dusty. All businesses looked closed. This is probably my imagination, but from the moment I drove past the sign, I felt eyes on me from all directions. I didn't feel welcome here, though I was sure there was no one to be bothered. And then there was the smell. It was faint but ever present, floating on the wind as my car crept down Main Street. That stale, earthy scent of old basements and wet, dark places. Mold. The town smelled like mold. I sped up, deciding to drive through the town and continue south. I'd find a place to stay nearby and return in the morning to do a bit of proper exploring. The apartment building and the police station were especially tempting. I'd never explored a police station before. I was just about to cross the bridge that marked the south border of town, leaving the buildings behind and continuing into the woods when I saw someone walking down near the creek. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I thought I was alone. I stopped the car, but didn't get a very good look in the gathering twilight before she, if it was a she, disappeared under the bridge. She was very, very thin, starvation status, I'm sure of it, and walked with a pronounced limp. She had a pale head, mostly bald, but near the top of her scalp were growing a few scattered clumps of thin, wispy brown hair. It was really long. It went over her shoulders and down her back. A filthy dress hung off her frame. I watched her for a moment with my mouth open, then sped across the bridge when she disappeared from sight. She hadn't looked up at me, even though my headlights had been shining at her. Part of me thought I should see if I could help her, but most of me was screaming that that was a bad idea. I'm a lone, unarmed woman, and I didn't know who or what was under that bridge. Trust your gut, they say. I reached another set of barriers further down the road, with another detour sign leading oncoming traffic towards the freeway. It seemed these barriers had been set up specifically to cordon off the town. Why? I found a motel near the freeway and a small gas station. I decided to stay the night and go back first thing tomorrow. I called my friend in San Francisco and excitedly explained my discovery and why I might be another day late. Now that I was out of the town, I brushed off the feeling of unease. It had been quiet and eerie, and that lady was creepy as hell. But with the freeway only 10 miles away, I figured a transient had wandered along. Maybe she was squatting in the town, but dealing with homeless people is part of the adventure. So yes, I went back. There's a lot more to this story, and soon you'll understand why I'm posting this to our /NoSleep as opposed to a different sub, but this is getting long. I think I'll save the rest for next time. Sorry this wasn't too exciting. I googled ghost towns in Oregon, but nothing fit the description. Does anyone who lives around there have any idea about the history of this place? Sorry, I can't give you a name. But maybe you've come across a creepy little village too. One that seems abandoned and smells like mold. This is the end of part one, next to the part two. The thing is, I can't take all your advice about not returning to infected town. I did all of this last week, before heading into California. I'm currently safe in San Francisco with no signs of moldiness. Last we left off, our plucky heroine, yours truly, planned to spend the night in the motel and return to Creepyville in the morning to do a bit of true exploring. I asked the gas station attendant about the ghost town up the road. He said he used to get a lot of regulars from up that way, but not for a while. Then the road got closed. There used to be a few more signs and some police tape, he said, and he'd seen a couple cop cars parked by the barriers. I asked him the name of the village, but he said he didn't know. I thought that was really weird. Why wouldn't you know the name of a town half an hour away? There's nothing up that way, he said as I left. Oh, good. My own personal harbinger of doom. The next morning I got up and packed my backpack. Flashlights, extra batteries, gloves, an N95 respirator in case of mold or asbestos, some rope, a fuck ton of glow sticks, a few flares, a basic first aid kit, and my Swiss Army knife. Plus bottled water. I also brought my handy-dandy crowbar. It was heavy, but worth lugging around in the face of a stuck door or window. Like an idiot, I'd left my camera at home. I'd mourned this since the night before, when I looked in my bag and found it missing. I was sure I'd packed it, having planned to explore a couple places my friend knew of in San Francisco, but it's probably sitting on my bed at home, all lonely and sad. I took a couple pictures in the town with my phone, but none of them turned out. Terrible lighting, I guessed at the time. So, the first exploration, that feeling of being, watch returned immediately upon crossing the bridge into the village. And as I drove towards the buildings, the scent of mold did as well. Faint, but eternally present. My first stop was the police station. I weighed the pros and cons of breaking into a government building, but not for long. I was too eager. The town was as empty as ever. After all, I parked in the lot behind the station, beside a few dusty squad cars. I guess the building should be called more of a sheriff's office than an actual police station. It's a low, tan-colored building with a ground floor and a basement. The windows in the back aren't busted like the front, but they're grimy. Spots of black adorn the corners of most of them, which I soon discovered was some kind of mold. I've never seen mold like it, though. I tried the front doors first, in case people were actually in the building, but they were locked. I swung around back where I'd seen a metal maintenance door when I parked. It had been firmly shut, I remembered, and I didn't have much hope for it. Already planning to try to pry. Open a window, I came around the corner of the building. The maintenance door was open. I blinked. Yes, there was open just a crack. I couldn't believe I hadn't noticed it before, but brushed it off. Breathing deeply, I pulled open the door and was met with the stifling smell of mold. I got the N95 out of my bag and affixed it to my face in case of spores. I stepped inside the building after wedging the door open with a heavy rock. The hallway I stood in had a bathroom to my immediate right and a custodial supply closet to my left. It led into a large office area with many doors and cubicles. There were 3 small jail cells in the northeast corner, and through a metal door to the east was the reception and waiting area. The place was dusty and sounds were muffled like cloth pressed over the years. The interior had a distinct look of decay. Paint was peeling from the walls. All the light bulbs were broken. The carpet was pulling up at the corners. The mold around the windows doesn't have the usual spotty pattern I associate with mold. It grows in groups, usually in corners in a big black mass, then spreads out in long, slender lines made up of tiny colonies. I'm not even sure it is mold. At times it looks like it. At other times it looks like some kind of plant life. It smells like mold, though. I avoided all physical contact. The walls and ceilings of the building weren't moldy, just the windows. I picked my way through the office area towards the holding cells. It looked eerily as though people had up and left in the middle of a workday. Photos and personal effects still sat on desks. Papers and files littered the ground, but were also stacked high on desks and in and out trays. Rotting jackets were draped over rotting chairs. Most of the doors were locked. The cells were locked, too, and empty. I was a bit disappointed by the building so far. I found out why the front window was shattered when I went into the lobby. Bullet holes peppered the plaster on either side of it, and bullet casings littered the floor. A smear of what looked like dried brown blood painted the wall under the window. What had happened here? There were no bodies. Maybe it was an old crime scene, which was actually pretty cool. I tried taking pictures, but like I said, they didn't turn out. They just looked black or really blurry sepia tones. Something moved to my left. I couldn't see it, but I heard the shifting of papers and something sliding across the carpet. I froze, pointed my light in its direction, and yelled, "Anyone in here?" No response. Heart rate quickening. I asked again and was again met with only rustling. The noises came from behind the tall reception desk. I got up on my tiptoes and shone my light behind it. The noises stopped. I saw nothing, just a swivel chair and a knocked-over phone. I couldn't see under the desk, and the door to the right that led into the reception area was locked. At this point, I assumed an animal was in there, maybe a raccoon. Raccoons freak me out. They're vicious little shits. Don't let their adorable faces fool you. In any case, I decided to leave well enough alone and check out the basement. I've mentioned several times that this town made me feel watched. Upon stepping down those creaky wooden stairs and letting the door swing shut behind me, the feeling intensified tenfold. I figured at the time that it was because it was pitch black and I only had my flashlight to see by. The decay down there was particularly bad. The entire ceiling was covered in black, as well as the ventilation ducts. The mold oozed halfway down the wall, which dripped brackish water. Along one wall hung 3 headless human figures, brown and rotting. They made me jump violently when my light landed on them. But a second look told me that they were actually old hazmat suits that seemed to be covered in filth. The helmets lay at their feet. Someone had set up a makeshift lab down here, between filing cabinets and cardboard boxes. The rotting counters on the opposite wall held a microscope, a bunch of dirty test tubes and glassware, and a 2013 Mac desktop, which looked just as moldy as the rest of the place. That gave me pause. I'd never seen this level of decay in such a modern building. The computer looked like it had been there for 30 years, not one. A pile of papers sat next to the microscope, mildewed and barely legible, but dense with type. I remember a few phrases from when I glanced at it, like signs of accelerated growth and stage 1 symptoms that caught my attention. I was about to start flipping through the file, but before I could even touch it, the door at the top of the stairs behind me slammed open. I yelped and spun around. "Get up here!" someone screamed from upstairs. It was a male voice, ragged and breaking. Though the tone was aggressive, he didn't sound angry so much as panicked. It set my heart thudding. The beam of my flashlight didn't reach the top of the stairs, so I couldn't see who was calling to me. No one was at the top of the stairs when I got closer. Eager by now to get out of the building, I took them 2 at a time. The main floor hallway was empty, too, which both relieved and perplexed me. Where had the man gone? Didn't matter. I decided to try to escape any form of trouble and made my way quickly towards the maintenance door I'd entered the building by. It had shut behind me, I noticed immediately, which meant someone else was definitely in the building. I raced towards it, though nothing was chasing me, almost expecting it to be locked. But it opened quite easily, and I spilled out into the sunlight. I tripped over the heavy rock I'd used to prop the door open, which had been purposely moved, picked myself up, and found sanctuary in my car. I probably should have left town then. The experience with the screaming man had set me on edge, and I hadn't really enjoyed exploring the police station. Even seeing the old crime scene in the lobby had failed to really pique my enthusiasm, prodding instead at my underlying fears. But what happened there? Was the bloodstain connected to the lab in the basement? I wasn't done looking around town. I'll save the exploration of the apartment building for next time. It was the creepiest place I've ever been in terms of atmosphere. It deserves its own update. Thanks again for all your help. NoSleep. Thank you for hearing this story. Have a good night.